Welcome to Conversations from the Collection, a Newcastle Art Gallery podcast. This podcast was produced on the land of the Awabakal and Worimi people. We pay our deepest respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm your host, Zana Kobayashi, and each episode will be diving into a new collection area of the Newcastle Art Gallery to uncover hidden stories from artists who have contributed to the significance of our diverse collection. In this episode, we speak with celebrated Torres Strait Islander artist and curator Brian Robinson. Brian is probably best known for his distinctive printmaking practice and his iconic public art sculptures. Throughout his career, Brian has carefully balanced his highly successful art-making practice alongside his work as a curator, developing some of the most important exhibitions of Torres Strait Islander material culture, including Wara Wara, The Art of Torres Strait, which was held at Newcastle Art Gallery in 2021. We caught up with Brian online, who joined us from Gimoy, also known as Cairns, in far north Queensland. Hi!
Hello, how you going?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good, thanks.
That's good. We could have filled an entire series talking about Brian's achievements, but for today's episode, we've focused on some of the major milestones in his career, including creating an Australian landmark, designing the Athletes Parade track at the Commonwealth Games, and developing a distinct printmaking style that combines traditional cultural motifs and pop culture characters. And that's only scratching the surface. But to begin with, we started with Brian's earliest memories growing up on Wyburn Island, also known as Thursday Island in the Torres Strait.
Well, I think the first memories that I always jump to would be living with my grandparents. So a lot of fishing expeditions that would start, before the crack of dawn, getting all the supplies ready and things like that to take down to the dinghy. Fishing, through until about lunchtime, coming home, cleaning, the day's catch, and then, off on the pushy delivering fish around the island. Even though, it's a small remote island, I still had heaps of fun, sort of exploring the island, swimming around the wharves, playing, sort of tiggy that would last for, several days. And just things like that.
And was art part of your childhood?
Art has always been a part of that childhood. I always say, I was born with a pencil in my hand because I was quite crafty when I first started, grabbing bits and pieces, from around the house, cutting up and building sculpture with cardboard and things like that. I was always drawing, so I always had, sort of paper and pens and pencils around. Unfortunately, that drawing didn't always stay on the paper. It went to the table and then, under the table and on the walls, and I got hooked on spray paint, so I used to spray the back fence. So I would make a general mess of things, sometimes on a daily basis. So it was, my life has always been creative in that way.
You've just turned it into a career now.
That's right.
When did the idea of making art a career start to enter your mind?
I think it's always been there. Visual arts is something that most people would only see as a hobby, something that you do on the side after work or something like that. But I just couldn't, sort of come to grips with that as a hobby, and I wanted to, sort of pursue it and make it a full-time career, a full-time practice. It has taken quite some time because, there was a 14-year gap of me working as a curator in the Cairns Regional Gallery, but, other institutions around the country as well. So that took up, quite a bit of time just developing, that side of my career. And the visual arts would be dragged along, sort of done over the weekends at night. But it's always been there, and it's always something that I've wanted to pursue full time. I was offered a 1-month residency, and I think that may have been in 2009. There was an offer from the former director of Kick Arts, Ray O'Connell, asking, whether I'd, take a bit of a sabbatical from the gallery and produce prints for a month, which, sort of probably sealed the deal for me, really. I may have stayed at the gallery a little bit longer had that, not happened. But that month of, sort of freedom from the gallery, freedom to explore, the practice a lot more, working on prints every day, basically, was absolutely great. And then, so, when I went back to gallery after that, art practice was probably first and foremost, in my mind. And then the offer came again from Ray O'Connell, but this time it was a 12-month. And so when I had the opportunity to do that, I grabbed it with, sort of with both hands and took the plunge.
It served you well. I wanted to move into talking about your works in the Newcastle Art Gallery collection. We hold 5 of your works, and they're bold graphic lino prints that observe traditional art techniques from the Torres Strait Islands, but also reference Western art history and pop culture. For example, a work in the collection titled "By Virtue of This Act, I Hereby Take Possession of This Land." It features an image of James Cook against a backdrop of space invaders. When did you start incorporating pop culture characters into your work?
You can blame the 12-month residency for that. Well, I suppose, sort of after that period or during that period of 12 months, sort of print work, constantly having to, sort of think of new ideas, new works. That's where I really started to focus heavily on, the use of pop culture within the work. Because, as a small child growing up in the Torres Straits, even though it was, a small remote island, I was still heavily influenced by television, by comic books. And so, it was about incorporating, sort of these treasured, sort of childhood experiences into the current works that I was creating, and making the new works that I created different from a lot of my fellow visual arts colleagues. And so, the works themselves, sort of developed that way. And most of the time you really have to look to see the pop cultural references, because they are generally hidden in amongst all the mineral, or the Torres Strait patterning that forms a big sort of part of the work. But then with that particular work there, By Virtue, the use of the Space Invader really sort of stands out and sort of smacks you in the face, because it's it sits right at the top of the piece of sort of lino, and it's about hammering home, that message of the invasion of the country by external foreign, sort of people.
Yeah, it kind of modernises that concept a little bit.
Yeah.
I would never think to put those two images together, but they work so beautifully together.
And I suppose, the pose of Captain Cook as well, it's the same pose that Nathaniel Dance did in his oil painting. So it's bringing in a number of different things, probably touching more on sort of political sort of stance through the use of the Space Invader, that 1970s sort of pop cultural sort of icon. The person that probably everyone throws a lot of hate at in terms of supposed discovery of the country and all the turmoil that has come about after that period, as well as looking at the history of painting, looking at those historical figures as well.
In another work from our collection, As the Rains Fell and the Seas Rose, you touch on biblical themes, depicting a contemporary version of Noah's Ark. There are Torres Strait Islander warriors guarding the rear of the procession that features pop culture characters such as Mickey Mouse, Batman, Predator, and a flying Astro Boy. And there's also, which I particularly love, an incoming wave that references the Hokusai woodblock print Under the Wave of Kanagawa. How do you begin mixing these influences together, and do you go in consciously, or do they begin to sort of form as you're developing the work?
They form as I'm composing the work directly on the block. So when it comes to my printmaking, I draw directly onto the block first, instead of, sort of going from paper to block. And so it's through that initial composition of the work that a lot of these characters, sort of do start to materialize. It's a subject, or a story that I've always wanted to depict. Sort of Noah's Ark. And so that's just sort of my version. But that point of difference, because a number of other artists have also, sort of done that same work. And so a point of difference is, sort of instead of having the animals going up into the ark 2 by 2, it's me putting in place those pop cultural, sort of references that are now heading up into the ark. And, instead of saving all the animals, you save all the pop culture.
Yes. Also important, I think. Now, alongside your studio practice, you obviously also have your public art work. How did those large-scale public artworks sort of enter into your practice? Was it around this time that you made the decision to focus on visual arts full-time, or had you been making those works previously?
No, I started my first public artwork right at the time of me starting work at the regional gallery. So, I already had, sort of two conflicting, sort of scenarios right there. But it wasn't until, I think it was 2002, which was when the woven fish were developed. And I think, the creation of that particular piece of public art really put me on the map, so to speak, in terms of, sort of public art practice across the country. It was the first major, sort of work that I'd done in the public realm. And it's been one of those amazing projects that has continued to, sort of give and give.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those fish, for me, I lived in Cairns for a year. And whenever I think of Cairns, I think of the woven fish in the lagoon. I spent many afternoons swimming in the lagoon underneath the fish, and they're so iconic for that location now. And it's been described as one of the most recognisable pieces of public art in Australia even. How does it feel to have made a work that's so globally renowned?
You don't think of these things when you're developing them at all. It's more, sort of being in the moment, sort of when you're creating the work and, sort of just developing, and looking at that sort of aspect of it. And then everything else, sort of comes later once they're installed. And being, sort of public art pieces, sort of sculpture that sits in the public domain, they're open for the good, the bad and the ugly in terms of, public comment, impact from the environment, et cetera, and they've withstood everything that has been, sort of hurled at them, as well as me.
And I understand that the design of the fish that replicates the Torres Strait Islander practice of weaving palm leaves into the shape of a fish. Was it difficult to translate that into stainless steel?
It was actually. But if you, sort of step back just a little bit further, when I sort of received the brief about what was being developed, I thought of, sort of developing that idea because it ticks so many boxes in terms of, the overall use of that space and the, sort of the location of Cairns itself. So one, sort of the fish icon being connected to the Great Barrier Reef, the use of the woven aspect to the fish, picked up on, the use of natural vegetation found throughout the region, close proximity to World Heritage listed, sort of rainforests, amazing, sort of palm trees for the landscape. The idea of that ephemeral weaving practice that sits within the domain of, sort of Indigenous material culture. And then when you look at just the idea of the little woven fish itself as well, those little objects were quickly woven to decorate feasting tables and, sort of hang from trees in the Torres Straits. And so it was about bringing people to these areas where they could eat and, sort of have that interaction with food and with family and friends and, everything that a normal, sort of feasting would bring about. And there was some serious machinery involved in, sort of bending the stainless to get the curves that we required and, sort of that idea of the plaited, sort of woven fish. It came together, quite amazingly.
Did you actually weave the steel?
There are parts of, so some of the steel being woven, but then there are other parts that, sort of just mimic the look of that woven sort of steel as well.
How is developing a work for public art different to creating work for a gallery context? And how does your process within that change?
When they first both start out, they are very similar. When it comes to public art, you need to consider public safety aspects of these sculptural pieces being in civic spaces where people generally interact with them a lot more than what they would in a gallery. So you go through a more robust pathway in terms of looking at how it physically, will stand or lay, all of the external environment and how that impacts upon the work itself. Everything, that you don't need to consider when you're actually developing work for indoor exhibition, sort of pieces. A lot more that you need to consider, a lot more people that you need to work with, from local, sort of council authorities to engineers to amazing fabricators that will turn, your little weird and wonderful drawings into, the sculptures that you see out in civic spaces. But when it comes to my sculptural practice for exhibition, it's just me.
Yes.
I build everything, cut all the plastic, all the timber, everything myself. You lug it around the studio. Yeah. Starts off, very similar, but two different realms as the works, sort of progress.
I wanted to talk about, in 2018, you were commissioned to design the athletes' parade track for the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games. What was it like to produce your work at such a large scale?
I don't think words can actually describe, sort of seeing something like that went from a small paper, sort of sketch to a piece of lino to something that filled an entire stadium. It was absolutely mind-blowing. And I remember, sort of getting the phone call from an organisation called Jack Morton Worldwide. They're the team responsible for the opening and closing ceremonies for the games, saying, they'd been scouring the internet, looking for images from Australian artists, or Queensland-based, sort of artists that could develop work for this particular project. And I was absolutely gobsmacked. to be quite honest.
It's not a call you expect every day, is it?
No, it's not actually. But it was a project that, ended up taking, I would say maybe 8 months, if not longer. Because I did, the initial sort of sketching, and they provided me with all the different performances that would happen, sort of throughout the opening ceremony. That was the starting point for me, and it was, sort of filling in all of those different programs that were running throughout the night, and physically, sort of creating the track design around that program. When you look at the 10 pieces of lino block that I used to create the work, if you imagine an elliptical, sort of stadium, from the two wider sides, you're looking at an area, I think it was about close to 6 meters in length there. Oh, wow. And then the two shorter sides, maybe about 3.5 meters. And I've got, a number of studio spaces here in Cairns that I use, but I don't have physical space that is that big without having tables and sawhorses and all sorts of other things,
Yes.
that crowd up that space. So I had to take all of the blocks down to a local shopping centre car park to physically lay them all out and start, sort of the drawing process, in the car park at the shopping centre.
Was this late at night? Were you doing?
No. This is during the day, when there was some light about. Otherwise, I'd have to bring my own light source, and security wouldn't be too impressed, I don't think. But I had a number of security officers approach me asking, what the hell are you doing in this car park? And, once I explained, they sort of went on their way and all that sort of stuff. I wasn't, doing, vandalist graffiti or anything like that to their car parks. They were all good. And so, after I drew, sort of all the blocks up, it took me 6 weeks straight, starting work at 8 in the morning, finishing, sort of 5, 6-ish in the afternoon, but constantly carving all day for that period of time. So, started to get, a bit of RSI on the hands after that period. But that project kept me going in terms of, the energy I required to carve all of that piece. And so I've got, the physical blocks still here at home that were used. I do have one print of the entire track itself, the paper version that was created from the lino blocks. And then I've still got 30, 40 metres of the actual track that they used at the opening ceremony as well, rolled up into, various sized portions that have been laying, around home ever since, they were dumped in my driveway.
Good to hold on to this stuff.
It certainly is. But, it was the first time that an artist was given the opportunity to develop the athletes parade track. And it was a real privilege to be chosen to develop that work.
You've said before that you're not classed as a traditional Indigenous artist. Can you explain to our audience why that is, despite using traditional motifs or techniques in your works?
All the works themselves, whether they're sculpture, print, they all start off with that strong Indigenous storytelling, sort of basis. And then over the top of that, it's then layered with references to, sort of pop culture, my own, sort of personal thoughts on various subjects that are all related, to the main, sort of story that it starts off with. And so through the layering of each and every work, it then becomes a little bit muddled, I suppose, a little bit hidden over, what is a traditional piece of artwork, a traditional story or a traditional mark. And while the print work that I create, a lot of it is based on traditional mark making from the Torres Straits, it's that hidden story within the work that, sort of takes it out of that context. And I suppose the use of the pop culture as well really does help with that. But when you look at the sculptural work that I make, it could be made by, anyone.
Absolutely.
And so they all still, sort of stem from, that storytelling basis, but just the way that they're created visually, like I said, anyone could have, could have created them.
And your work's also described as experimenting with the boundary between reality and fantasy. And what interests you about that space?
Oh, it's the space that I live in. I'm just the big kid, really. I'm sort of surrounded in my house here by sort of figures of Marvel figures and Star Wars figures and lightsabers and things like that. So it's that area of life that we all pop in and out of on occasion. I just live there constantly.
Sounds beautiful.
To create the work that I do. So I'm always in this, sort of fantasy, sort of landscape that takes me away from, takes me out of reality and out of the pressures of, sort of living living in society. I create my own little society in my work.
Sounds like a beautiful way to be living. I really want to talk about Wara Wara, the art of Torres Strait, because in 2021 you worked with Newcastle Art Gallery on this exhibition, and it was a landmark exhibition for Newcastle Art Gallery and the most significant First Nations exhibition in the gallery's 64-year history. Can you talk to us about your experience developing that show?
Oh, wow. Sort of shows like that aren't developed by, just the curator. Curator is, the person that will pull the story together, look at certain works that fit within that story. But it's all the stuff at Newcastle Art Gallery. Amazing people to work with that, I sold, I suppose, my vision for the exhibition to. Starting off with your amazing director, Loretta Morton, who sort of stalked me at a Sydney Contemporary a number of years back. It came over and said, Brian, I'm a big fan. She mentioned, big Torres Strait exhibition, are you up for the challenge? Which, I agreed to, I think sort of there and then. And that sort of started the relationship between myself, Loretta, and, the crew at the gallery. But, there was amazing support from a number of key community members as well. And one of those people who's also, sort of a fellow Torres Strait artist, an amazing performer, is Toby Cedar and his family. Amazing support for, both myself as well as the gallery in terms of, the work that he provided for the exhibition, the public program, sort of activities that were developed around the exhibition, and just general support and, sort of drumming up the community as well to attend these amazing events.
It's been described as the largest Torres Strait Islander exhibition outside of the Torres Strait Islands and Queensland. What was the impact that you saw the exhibition had on the local community?
The opening event itself was absolutely amazing. I didn't realise the size of the community that were living in, sort of your neck of the woods. So it was good to see, families come out and celebrate this sort of significant milestone and, the gallery bringing these works together, as well as the support that lenders and, everyone else involved all, sort of put towards the exhibition as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people, even in the city, didn't quite realise the sort of depth of the community that we had here. And I think that exhibition has really shifted that mindset in Newcastle in terms of, the cultural groups that we have living within us.
That's right. And I think it's important to do, develop exhibitions such as that to bring in, people who wouldn't normally enter spaces such as galleries and museums, because they were traditionally and probably still are to a certain sort of extent seen as institutions where only the elite go to, which may have been the case back in the day, but it's not the case these days. It's museums and galleries are your first port of call for anyone wanting to, I suppose, navigate the city or, the township that they're entering. They're the one-stop shop that shows you all the expression that you see, sort of throughout the community itself.
I like that image of a gallery. First portal into a place. All right, Brian, thank you so much. We have reached our final question, which is, if you could have dinner with any artist from the Newcastle Art Gallery collection, who would it be and why?
I didn't realise the extent of your collection, to be honest. So when you sent me the link, I went on and, started to go through, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, look at all the names that are just coming up. So there are a lot of names that are very familiar to me, and then there are a lot of names that aren't. And so there was one name that sprung to mind, a fellow printmaker actually, because I love talking, all things print. But this person is also not only, just a printmaker, but when you sort of dig down into, the mediums that are covered under printmaking, this person is also a lino cutter or, sort of a relief printmaker. So the person that I've chosen from your collection is Rue Hanks.
You'd have a lot to talk about.
I met Rue at a national print symposium a number of years ago. It was only a very brief, sort of chat and things like that. But I heard him, sort of speak. He gave a presentation on his practice and, showed images and things like that. And yeah, just fallen in love with his works. They're absolutely amazing. They're meticulously carved. I don't know how he gets so much bloody detail into those works. But yeah, absolutely amazing to look at. But then when you read the story behind the works and look at, the imagery through the works, they're very satirical. So there's a lot of tongue in cheek. Which I just absolutely love. So,
I can see a lot of that in your work too,
So yeah. We would do some amazing collaborative pieces, I think, me and Ruth.
Well, Brian, from the whole gallery team, koyama eso, thank you for joining us today. It's been such a delightful conversation. And can't wait to see you next time you're in Newcastle.
Hopefully it's sometime soon.
Thank you for listening to Conversations from the Collection. If you would like to know more about Brian or his works in the Newcastle Art Gallery collection, there are links in the show notes, or you can visit the gallery's website at nag.org.au. I hope you will join us again for next week's episode with Japanese ceramic artist Kenji Yuranishi.
Hopefully, when they put my work, near the window or somewhere light can entertain, gives them a special moment. That's the purpose of it. And that's the beauty of, I think, relationship with the shape.
Conversations from the Collection is a Newcastle Art Gallery podcast. This podcast is supported by the New South Wales Government through Create New South Wales. If you enjoyed listening, please like, subscribe, and share us with your friends.